Here.
Commissioner Samples?
Here.
Commissioner Johnson? Steve, you're muted.
Sorry, here.
Commissioner Wynn?
Here.
Commissioner Marin?
Here.
I am here. I think that's it. Let's do a salute to the flag. I think we can do this either sitting or standing. So suit yourself. I'll lead. Start. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Item B on the agenda is to approve the order of agenda. Do I hear a motion to approve the order, or are there questions on the order?
Motion to approve the order of agenda. Second.
Been moved and seconded that we accept the order of agenda. We'll do a roll call vote. Commissioner Solomon?
Aye.
Commissioner Samples? I'm sorry, Mel?
Got it. Yes. Aye.
Commissioner Johnson?
Aye.
Commissioner Wynn?
Aye.
Commissioner Marin?
Aye.
And Chairman votes aye as well. Blue folder items. Are there any blue folder items, Marnie?
Tonight, there are no blue folder items.
Okay. Now we move to the consent calendar. Business items, except those formally noticed for public hearing or discussion, are assigned to the consent calendar. The commission members may request that any consent calendar item be removed, discussed, or acted upon separately. Removed from the consent calendar will be taken up under the excluded consent calendar. Those items remaining on the consent calendar will be approved in one motion following oral communications. We have F1, F2, and F3 on the consent calendar. Does anyone want to remove those from the consent calendar? Hearing none, do I hear a motion to approve the consent calendar?
So moved.
Second.
Motion's been moved and seconded. Let's have a roll call vote on the consent calendar. Commissioner Solomon?
Yay.
Commissioner Samples?
Aye. Yay.
Commissioner Johnson?
Aye.
Commissioner Wynn?
Aye.
Commissioner Marin?
Aye.
And Chairman votes aye as well. I don't think there are any excluded consent calendar items. Public participation on non-agenda items. This section is intended to provide members of the public with the opportunity to comment on any subject that does not appear on the agenda for action. This section is limited to 30 minutes. Each speaker will be afforded 3 minutes to address the commission. Each speaker will be permitted to speak only once. Marnie, are there any requests for public participation?
Not in Zoom.
There's no e-comments.
Okay. Move on to agenda item J. Discussion and possible action regarding the self-insurance program fund. Marnie, you're leading this.
I am. So just briefly, we've been talking about the self-insurance program fund for several months now. Questions last time centered around our process in looking at the claims. When claims are filed, they're filed with the city clerk. The city clerk then forwards those on to risk management in the Human Resources Department. The Human Resources Department then works with both the department involved and the third-party administrator to get all the background information about the claim. Then the third-party administrator starts their review process, has some follow-up questions, and again, the departments are involved there. So there is a process to involve departments in the claims. But in addition to that, they are also involved in preventing future claims of a like manner. So I know that was a big concern at our last discussion. So tonight we're going to focus on one of those prevention items that the city is doing. The Public Works Department has a sidewalk grinding program that's used to prevent future trip and fall incidences on the sidewalks. So we have tonight with us Ted Simon, our Public Works Director, and Mike Klein, our Deputy Public Works Director. And so I'll turn it over to Ted Simon to get us started with a presentation on that sidewalk grinding program.
Great. Thank you, Marnie, and good evening, commissioners. And thank you for inviting us tonight. Again, my name is Ted Simon. I am the Public Works Director for the city. Tonight, we will be presenting you our strategies for sidewalk maintenance. As Rulin stated, it is one of the ways that we're reducing liability exposure for the city. The program itself started in its current path in approximately 2017 with a full survey of all of our sidewalks. Then we strategized on means and methods of improving the walkability and reduce the city's exposure to trip and fall claims along these sidewalks. This culminated into a multi-pronged implementation approach that Mr. Klein will outline in his presentation. And with that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Deputy Director Mike Klein to present the program to you. Mike?
And he's got a PowerPoint presentation, so I will attempt to share my screen with that. Open it here. And hopefully you can see that.
Good evening, commissioners. My name is Mike Klein. I'm the Deputy Director for Operations for the City of Redondo Beach. I've been here with the city for approximately 14 years. Wanted to go over the sidewalk maintenance program that is part of one of our capital improvement projects. We can go on to, I'll just say next, Marnie, for you. We had a few project steps that we had to do through this project. The sidewalk assessment and survey that went into a GIS tracking system that went on into a pilot project that we started, and I'll be expanding on each one of these as we go along. The expansion of the sidewalk and maintenance project in avenues of repair, and the progress of the project, and then what our next steps are. Next. So in 2017, we had been working on a program. We started to take a look at a lot of the things that we had with sidewalk uplifts and conditions that we had in sidewalk in response to some issues that we were having through litigation and things like that. And something that hadn't happened, all of our inspections of sidewalks were usually not enough documentation is the best way that I can put it. Working with our GIS department, one of our GIS specialists, a gentleman named Ryan Tucker, had put together a program that through our GIS system that we could catalog, that we could take a very good inventory of our issues that we're having out in our sidewalks. Through that program, the city had hired an engineering student directly out of college to basically walk all the streets of Redondo. She went out with a device that would collect information as she went along through the GIS system, plotted on a map. The picture in your lower left-hand corner is what the city looked like with all the conditions. This is one area around Juanita and Burrow. That's kind of the center of the picture. Each one of those blue or yellow spots on that is a condition that we have out on the sidewalks. That condition may be a divot in the pavement. It may be also there are several different conditions. I'll show you one of the conditions later on in a slide. But what that did is that if I were to expand that program in GIS, it would show the before picture, the picture that was taken on the inventory list, and then it would catalog it and take pictures and memorialize it basically on the GIS system so that we can refer to it later on as we go through repairs. This survey, what it did is that it helped us out with assessing the conditions and kind of what the priority that we had. Whether it was a very serious condition, a very serious condition could be something like an uplift of maybe 2 inches to 3 inches, something that hadn't had any work done on it. It can go down to even trivial defects that we may have, down to a standardized, which would fall into the grind category, from basically inch and a half, or I'm sorry, a half an inch all the way up to an inch and a half of an uplift. The documentation is very, very important for us, not only operationally, but in some other avenues, which I'll get into in a little bit further on. We can go to the next slide. So in our pilot project that we had, we started along with in 2017, the Public Works Division does own grinders. It does have equipment that we can tear sidewalks apart or just grind them out. This is one of the pictures of the that are one of the areas that we started. But then we also had reached out for a company to come out and help us out with some of the grinding to kind of compare how quickly we could get work done, how professionally we could get work done. Our crews are very capable of grinding sidewalks, but the speed at which we wanted to see what we could do so far as making it a little bit more of a project. So when we had capital improvement funds allocated for this, we had $140,000. We reached out on a piggyback from another city that had worked with a company called BPR. You may hear that or see that in some of your documents of money that we've spent with this company. The $140,000 split up with 5 different districts ended up giving us, we got a price per grind of about $24.97 per grind. And so what that did is that allowed us to do approximately 1,100 grinds per district. And we were trying to do this in an evenly throughout the city so that all the districts felt the love the same way, with the money on this. So we wanted to make sure that this was spread evenly. What this did is that it allowed us to start to really kind of get a good program going. We had other things that we were going to have to do, ramping, removal and replacement of sidewalks, grinding of the sidewalks. So it gave us a good scale of work. And it also gave us the opportunity of whether we should outsource a larger project in-house or outsourcing it or going in-house. The pilot project gave us a lot of tools, gave us a real good program for doing this. And in my determination, the success that we had really paid off, and we'll show you in the next in one of the next slides. Next slide, Marty. So in the typical conditions that we're finding out there, this is not a grind situation. I took one of the worst ones. This is a vertical uplift. One of the things that trying to get a lot of staff and a lot of people when we talk about trip and falls, of Courts don't like to, our attorneys don't hear the word trip and fall. It is a vertical uplift because it tends to lean people a certain way that we have things. So when we talk about this, it's vertical uplifts or sidewalk maintenance. So on these are sidewalks that have been pushed up for some reason. And so to get to this, we end up having to temporarily ramp because this is one that we cannot grind. We normally will only grind anything that has about anywhere from a half an inch up to an inch and a half. We can grind smaller than that if we feel that it's necessary. But for us, for conditions that we're concerned that we start to get concerned about, that's the kind of the category for that. This one would be after a temporary ramping. When I say temporary, this goes on to that GIS system that we had talked about and gives us a good platform to come back and see where we've got ramps so that we can tear and remove and replace the sidewalks. These conditions are often caused by tree roots that are growing in underneath the sidewalk. The sidewalks of Redondo are very live, if that makes any sense. What it is that we have a lot of tree roots, we have sinking conditions in certain areas. When the drought was here, we had contraction of the soil. Then when we had rain, we had expansion of the soil. The rain also helped a lot of the trees gain roots that are now reaching up to the surface for water. So it tends to kick our sidewalks around. So it does require that we do maintain these sidewalks or do something with them when we have these issues. Next slide. So the avenues of repair is that when we kick this into a little bit larger project, we reached out to this company, BPR. They're Oxnard-based company. They do grinding for quite a few cities around here. Torrance uses them. There's quite a few other cities that use them. They're very, very efficient at what they do. The picture to your left is a typical setup for them. This is one of their grinding platforms that they have. That machine in front of them is a very heavy grinder. It will go through and grind. That hose coming off of that attaches into a HEPA filter vacuum system with a generator on top. Keep that vacuum going. This way we keep the dust down. Taylor done like utility cart that they can scoot along through the city and work off that hose line and off of that. And they can, once they get off their truck, they can do a couple of blocks with just moving around. So it's a very quick and portable system that they do this. They're very professional at what they do. When we have people that are walking along the sidewalks, their heads are on a swivel all the time to make sure that we don't have, people walking up on top of them. So they're very conscious about this. They had worked basically through the year, through the start of COVID, didn't stop on this. The only thing that will stop a company like this from grinding is rain, because the grinders won't grind up in the rain. It tends to clog up the vacuum systems. The other avenues of repair that we have are also the roadway improvement CIPs. That is when we're doing larger construction on streets, say asphalt and pavement replacement, say, and use an example like Burl or one of the larger streets. We'll reach out to the contractors for the replacement of sidewalks that are in bad condition. We use the GIS system to mark that out. We mark that out for the contractors to take a look at. Then we can take that off the list and put that in as repair. When we did the Flagler, basically 190th to Barrel Street, Flagler Street, the contractor did a lot of the sidewalk replacement. That was all cataloged in that. So that's one of the means of repairing it. We are still continuing with city maintenance on sidewalks, of removal of sidewalks or of sidewalks and curb and gutter and things like that have to be done. And it will, and we will continue to have to replace sidewalks as we go along. There's quite a bit of work out there. Next slide. So the GIF mapping progress, this is the best way that I could put this up so that you guys can see what we're doing. We want to turn blue to green. On this map, on these two pictures right here, The first map is what we started off with. The second map right here is basically the same area, just turned into green markers. And each one of those green markers represents a condition that we've done something with. On the GIS system, if I were to log onto it, couldn't do that and share that portion of it because it's kind of a live system. I just wanted to give you an example, but if I were to click on one of those green flags, that would bring up the condition of the sidewalk, the location of it through GIS, have a picture next to it that I can access the before conditions, and then I can look at it for the after conditions. And then it will note when those dates were done. So this is extremely important for us, especially when we get into a couple other things down the road where if we have any conditions that we may have a claim on or anything like that, I can refer to these pictures very easily and show that to whoever needs to be looking at risk assessment and things like that. Next slide. Benefits. We're seeing a lot of things that we didn't expect with compliments from people. We're making our sidewalks, the benefits that have come are apparent are the more comfortable sidewalks for walking pedestrians. When we first started out this program, it was in the Franklin Park area. People were coming out, what are you doing? What are you doing? We're grinding the sidewalks. Oh, that is fantastic. My kids skateboard here all the time. And it gives them a very comfortable access on them. We're also seeing some of the benefits that the sidewalk assessment program has given the city attorneys a better factual basis for legal arguments they can make in defending the city. This program, when I have been in depositions, one of the questions in just this past year, do you have a sidewalk maintenance program that, what do you have? And that is normally coming from attorneys on the that are with claims. And the example is we had one on Avenue C. We have a sidewalk assessment program in place. This is what we do. This is what we've seen. This is what we can do with it. And we're moving on with the city. And so we're moving on with this program as we programs. So it works out pretty well for us on that. It helps the attorneys do their job also. Next slide. So our next steps, that slide that you saw that was with the sidewalk replacement of a ramp with asphalt built up on it, those would be ramp tearouts. Those are kind of important that we get to. We're continuing with the grinding. We're getting closer and closer to the end. I would say that we're probably getting close to 80% done with the grinding right now. The road improvements in our next programs that we have for road replacements, the engineering staff is also looking at tearing out of sidewalks that need to be torn out. One of the things that we have to continue with is a sidewalk assessment and survey for a yearly review. This is important that we continue this program. This can be done either through our staff or through interns coming through helping us out with this. And then the continued maintenance of grinding. Once we do an assessment again, I'm sure that we'll find another condition that has arisen because the sidewalks move on us. So we have a lot of good things that are happening. Some of the, in this picture down below, this is a very typical grind that we have. Very clean, very good looking, it's flat. Some people complain that it's marring the concrete, but what it does is that when we're grinding that portion of the concrete down level with the other side, it gives a good comfortable, so that we don't have any kind of hazard or anything like that. It will normally bleach out over time. When it has water on it, will kind of blend in with the concrete. There'll still be a mark, but instead of tearing out all the sidewalks, which would be extremely costly, where we can, we try to grind them. Next slide. So if you have any questions, I'd be more than happy to answer them. Again, my name is Mike Klein. I'm the Deputy Public Works Director, and I've been overseeing this project.
Yeah, Mike, Commissioner Woodham, I do have a couple of questions. What did we do? How did we manage this issue before the program you're describing. This certainly makes a lot of sense, and you'd hope that it continues. So how did we do it before, and how do you measure the cost benefit trade-off between what you did before and this?
The programs that we had before were complaint driven, were when we had staff that was maybe they had a partial disability or that they may have an injury, we would have them go out there and take a look at things out on the sidewalks and categorize them the best that we could. We never did anything, and it was basically done off of a paper trail. And so we would get a list of conditions that we had, and we would categorize those, what needed to be grinded, what needed to be replaced, removed and replaced. When we got the GIS system in the fashion that it is right now through our engineering department, did a fantastic job working with Ted Saman. I'm not looking for, I like to compliment my boss whenever I can because he's done a this one I had been working, you see something that works and that makes sense and that's beneficial. When I have attorneys and I'll tell you, when I have the grinding company that we're using BPR go, nobody else uses a system like this where they're cataloging it and they're seeing the stuff that you're doing. This made so much sense. It's costly. I'm not, because not only am I spending money on the crews going out there and grinding, but I also have to be paying people that are documenting. But that documentation in the lawsuits, and I haven't heard from the attorneys where I hear we're doing good in some of the defense things that we've had. So that part of it, I think, we're going to have to weigh out and see how this turns out for us, because Ted may be able to speak a little bit more on that end. In the 2020 CIP for $500,000, in the CIP, we were given $500,000. In that, we divided that up amongst 5 districts, the same way we did on the pilot project, gave $100,000 per district. The other part that BPR, when we use them, is that they drop their price from $24.97 down to $22.47 a grind. This helps out a lot. That ends up being now 4,450 grinds per district, okay, combined with the other things that we have. There's a lot of work out there that has to be done in grinding and replacements. That's not the only place that we need to spend money. In the CIP, there was also in the same CIP, we also put away $100,000 for work on Artesia and work down in the Riviera that we'll be using for total sidewalk replacements. But what this does is that it gives us, the ability to get this program running. The cost benefit, Ted, if you want to share on anything, it's really going to be seen at litigation cases and things like that.
Yeah, thank you, Mike. And I think, thanks for the compliment. Now it's recorded. It's forever memorialized, so I'm good with that. But really, I've been with the city a little over 5 years. And Commissioner Woodham, when you asked that question, what did we do before? It is a question that both Mike and I sort of scratched our head about, a program that has consistencies with it that could be seen legally by our attorneys as a program that can actually help the city and defend the city. There are things out there called trivial defects. I know Mike mentioned it during his presentation. It's gone back and forth in the courts. Sometimes it's 1/2 inch, sometimes it's 3/4 of an inch. We've even heard it go up as high as 1.25 inches in terms of deflection within the sidewalk itself. In reality, for us, there was a multi-pronged approach even on that improvement. One was reducing that liability to the city. And from a cost benefit perspective, it's very easy for us, not that we've done it in a calculated manner, but it's one of those things that you're spending money to save money, right? We started out early on, as Mike said, we started the program in 2017, where we got involved with our attorneys and our risk manager, and we would have claims that were coming in the multi-thousands of dollars. In some cases, it could be hundreds of thousands of dollars, depending on the level of injury that somebody may have sustained. It didn't give the attorneys a solid background when you don't have a consistent program. So we put our heads together, we worked internally, and then we also worked with our risk manager and our attorneys to create the program that we have today that really has not just memorialized, but categorized a program that they said, as attorneys now, when they bring something to court and identify how much effort the city has, how consistent this program has been working for us, it almost reduces our liability by a significant value, because now the attorneys and the judges are quick to identify not only the trivial defects, but the city is doing its part. And the reason we say the city is doing its part, because this is a living program, if you will. It's never going to go away. As Mike mentioned, the majority of these defects that occur is because of our trees that are out there. And there are not just trees in the city's public right-of-way or the parkways. There are trees on private property that are near, or even if they're a little bit far, that will have roots out there that are invasive roots, and they will do uplifts on the sidewalks. So the fact that we've got this going now, we surveyed the entire city, as Mike mentioned, back in 2017, but we now have a program where we're going to be continually surveying the city, almost a third of the city on an annual basis. So every 3 years, we have a full redo, if you will, of the city, a full assessment of the sidewalks in the city, in which we see this grinding program as an ongoing staple to try to capture a lot of these early on in the program. And as Mike said, as far as the capital improvement program, with any of our roadway resurfacing projects, anything except slurry seal, we want to capture any of these sidewalks that need replacement. Even if they have a grind opportunity, we would be able to integrate this contractor basically under that CIP. And obviously we do our ramp upgrades at those particular locations. So from a monetary perspective, we haven't necessarily done a cost benefit analysis directly, but we've identified a significant reduction in liability and exposure to the city just by having the program continue on in the method that it has. I'm sorry, that's a long-winded answer for a short question.
Good, thanks. Further questions?
Yes, thanks, Mike and Ted, for the presentation. And Ted, I'd like to compliment you also just for being a great person. I have a few questions for you. Those geographic information systems are really great. And there's courses at the universities where people get expertise just in that area. Do they have a scoring system when we're mapping it out so that you can recognize the areas that would be prioritized versus maybe that could wait in different parts of the city? So a 1.5 inch lift for this spot scored X, and a 1 inch lift in this spot scored Y?
Yeah, it doesn't have a scoring mechanism. It basically, we're able to sort it and identify it just by the amount of lift that has been recorded. So we're able to categorize. I think the categories, Mike, remind me, it was a 1/2 inch to 1.5 inch, 1.5 to 3, and then anything over 3. And from that, we're able to pull, where our needs are. From an implementation perspective, on the CIP side, irrelevant of the amount of lift, it's identified under our survey, then it gets improved under the CIP. From a grindability perspective, 1.5 inches seems to be the threshold of how far we can grind. Anything more than that starts to jeopardize the structural integrity of the sidewalk for it to be able to take vehicle weight and other things. So 1.5 inches and below, we immediately categorize that into the grinding component. And, when the pilot program worked so well, we estimated based on our 2017 survey that we would need approximately 500,000. And I know Mike described it as an equivalent value by dollars to each of the districts. In reality, for us, at the end of the day, it's the number of grinds that we have, and not necessarily it's just by district. We're obviously dispersing that money throughout the city. But our estimate was about 500,000 for everything that was lower than 1.5 inches. So we estimate that we're actually going to be capturing, as Mike said, 80% now. We're trying to capture the majority, if not all, of anything that's 1.5 inches and below under the grinding program. But that was also, and Mike, correct me, probably 90% of the uplifts that we had recorded. So it made the balance significantly more manageable. It is more costly, but by location, it is more manageable. And then, like I said, we try to coordinate the majority of that right into the CIPs. The CIPs themselves have a mechanism under our pavement management system. And then that gets discussed with the city council to prioritize which roadway segments are going to get resurfaced. And then the remainder follows through that.
One of the things that,
And yet, I'm sorry, go ahead, Mike.
go ahead, Eugene.
You had mentioned how it integrates with some of our other CIP projects, and that was one of the questions that I had. To the point that Mike made about the attorneys and lawsuits and things like that, having a program like this definitely helps. I can tell you from experience. The other place that it helps is when we're looking to our insurance carriers and our pool insurance. If we have a program, a preventative maintenance program like this, we can get a credit to our insurance premiums because they recognize that having a program like this will save on slip and fall claims and thereby maybe reduce not just liability claims that we have on the plaintiff versus the city, but also in our insurance scoring, as it were, where we're looking to generate a lower premium. And we give the underwriter a reason to give us a lower premium by having a program like this in place. When we're identifying these areas on the sidewalks and such, did we expand it where we're also looking at our plant, like the Civic Center, not just the sidewalks, but the parking lots down by the pier, the Performing Arts Center, and other areas that we might be able to identify that would have similar hazards like this?
So on the initial assessment, it was done primarily only on the sidewalks off the streets. When we started to get into this, as we started to grind, and the cost that the benefit that we're seeing through BPR and their reduced costs, we started to go into parks. We started to go into city hall areas. We started to go into these areas. These are places that are public right of way, needs to be done. We wanted to concentrate on the sidewalks because that's what our initial assessment was based on. But in the on the second go around for the assessment, we'll be reaching into parks. We've got enough grinds in this program that we're going to be able to reach out into the parks and do a lot of them, which we already have. So it was something that Ted and I had discussed a while ago. We did want to maintain all the street grinding as priority. We will be taking a look at a lot of a lot of the parks and a lot of the public areas, Performing Arts Center, things like that.
Okay, great. Thank you, Mike. Will you, Ted, when you're looking at the canopy program that we have for the city with the invasive roots that are causing some of the problems, do you incorporate the system that you have, the GIS system, into how we manage the tree canopies also?
No, actually, that has its own program right now. That's for our tree maintenance itself, and they identify the canopy, the size, the height of the tree, the maturity of the tree, the health of the tree. What this program, though, does is when we identify the uplift, and as Mike mentioned, we are taking pictures essentially at the beginning and then every step of the process. We have encountered trees, like I mentioned, private property trees as well as public trees, where those root systems are something that need to be, addressed when we come to the removal and replacement of that sidewalk. In certain cases, we have to have an assessment made by our arborist on the species of the tree. Is that a tree that actually can sustain root pruning in order to be able to drop the sidewalk to the proper grade that it's supposed to be at? Is it not, there are certain trees that may not be susceptible or at least good candidates for root pruning. And we have to make that determination. If we're going to be fixing the sidewalk and we've got a trip hazard as an example, is the choice going to be the removal of the tree and replanting of a new tree that's going to be better suited for that? I can tell you with the new plantings, we are putting in root barriers. Root barriers are a method to deflect roots downward rather than allowing them to remain shallow, where they are the most impactful on our sidewalks, curb gutters, and streets themselves. But we are going to have a lot of challenges, and we understand those challenges when it comes to the older mature trees. And we've run across several of them that are on private property that may be so close to the back of the sidewalk that we would be unable to actually repair the sidewalk without having the tree removed.
One of the issues that we do run across, and this was just recent, right off of 190th, we had a tree that was in front of a condo complex, that beautiful evergreen. And it had torn up the sidewalk. We had replaced it twice in my career that I know of. Not sure how many times before that. It was starting to lift up the curb and gutter, starting to get out into the street. And so going through the process of the removal of the concrete and the sidewalk and this, we were going to end up with a lot of roots. The tree was going to have to come out. So we tagged the tree so that everybody can understand. And then when the chainsaws came out, people got upset. Public Works walks on a tightrope in a 50-mile-an-hour wind all the time because we're not going to make somebody happy. And we do, and I'll tell this, we do not want to cut down trees. That is not something that Ted and I, in our arborist, we make sure that if we're going to remove a sidewalk and we find huge roots or there's sewer issues or something like that, and we cut those roots away and unstabilize the tree, then we fall into another category of liability that we don't want to be in. And so we have to make that judgment. We try to reach out to as many people as we can before we take any tree down. For these reasons, there is a just cause for it. It is not something that we do haphazardly. We post a tree. A lot of people don't read posts. With this tree, we posted for the reasons why. It had lifted the sidewalk so much that anybody going by in a stroller or in a wheelchair was kicked off basically into the grass. And so that's kind of things that we wrestle with as a group. And it got out to council, why are you trying, but then once you justify it and you tell council members what you're doing, they understand it. And there's concerned people that are out there that want, they want to know what's going on. We do not take trees down haphazardly. And I think that sometimes we get, they see the chainsaws come out and it's a, tree that somebody got engaged under, and then we're really in trouble, we have to have a reason for that. Sidewalk safety is one of them, and to making sure that we're doing the right things for everybody.
Okay. I thank everybody's indulgence for letting me geek out on a risk management presentation. So thanks very much. I have one more question, please, Marnie. This is a CIP fund that these monies are coming from. Is this something that we are refreshing on council is refreshing on an annual basis? Is it funded from general fund? Is it funded from one of our many other funds? How do those mechanics work where Ted and Mike or their department come to us and say, we've expended X number of resources on this program and we'd like to have it refreshed for the coming fiscal?
Actually, Ted's probably more familiar with its funding because, of course, he's in over engineering as well, which manages the CIP program.
Okay.
Sure. Thanks, Marnie. Commissioner Solomon, there's multiple funds that could be applicable here. General fund, as you mentioned, gas tax because this is part of a roadway improvement. That's eligible for roadway improvements. Local return monies that come in from Measure R or Measure M, those are eligible expenditures. And as Marnie, would attest to, for us, it's always a shuffle of which project gets which funding source because we want to get the most restrictive funds to the projects that are able to use those most restrictive funds and then leave the ones with the biggest opportunity to use for whatever our needs are. This is one of those items that we believe has a broad span of potential funding sources. We would like to continue to ask the city council, as Mike mentioned, this prior 2021 fiscal year is when council gave us the $500,000 to try to eliminate all the grindable locations within the city. The prior year, we had gotten the pilot program. I think the success of this program has really taken and given some momentum that we want to ask for a maintenance fund that will come back annually in order to do so. And we believe, $100,000 a year can probably keep this in check because, as we mentioned, we're going to continue the inspection program. And for us, as we continue that inspection program, we want to be able to continue to address a lot of these grindable locations in a very timely fashion.
Okay, it's nice to hear that we're able to use things like Measure R and Measure M funds from that and be able to tap in those funds and expend them there. Thank you very much for the presentation. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Are there further questions?
Have just a couple of comments and not sure that I really have a question in this. First, I'd like to say that I've been a resident of North Redondo for 30 years. And when I heard about the GIS mapping project a few years ago, my first thought was, will this ever get off the ground? And it's another one of those tracking projects that will never do anything. In the last year or so, my entire neighborhood has changed. And I'm really impressed with the progress that you've made in the grinding and the repair of the sidewalks. It's been really, truly amazing up here. And I do appreciate all the work and effort that's gone into it. I absolutely support the idea that this ends up being a maintenance program. I believe just intuitively that it saves the city a lot more money than it's costing to do this work. And anything that we can do or anything I can do to help you move that along, I would be happy to support because I think it's important for both a quality of life and for a safety of our citizens and savings to the city in terms of lawsuits and all the other risks that are involved. So thank you so much for this project.
Yeah, I double those comments. Anything else? Any other questions for Ted and Mike? Okay, Marnie, back to you.
Yeah, so if you have no further questions, I think we can move on to the next item.
Okay.
Thank you for having us, commissioners. Good night.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Great report.
Thank you, Ted and Mike.
And great work. We appreciate it. Marnie, do we need to receive and file anything on this? Is it just a report?
It's just a report, yeah.
Okay. Okay. Move on to item J2.
Sorry, before we go on, I think we need to mention there or ask if there's any public comment on the item.
And there's no Zoom public comment.
Yeah, and there's no e-comments, just to have that on record.
Okay, good. Thanks. Okay, Marnie. J2.
Yeah, so actually just today, we did our fiscal year 21-22 budget kickoff meeting with the departments. So they are going to be spending the rest of March putting together their budget submissions. Then during April and into May, the city manager will be taking that information and coming up with a proposed budget. So in addition to the information and requests that he's going to be receiving from the departments, he'd also like to get input from the various city commissions. And so I'm here to take any input you have and relay that information that he can take into consideration as he puts together the proposed budget for council.
This is for more than just the capital improvement, but just for the annual operating budget, Marnie?
Yep, both.
Recognizing that it may not be possible, but hopeful, especially when you consider the recent legislation that was passed. And I think it was Councilman Horvath that mentioned the other night how we might be getting some state funds based on allocation. If we could bring back Moss Adams to complete that project, I'd be for that.
I will note that.
Other comments and thoughts? Okay. So Marnie, what's the schedule again? Budget by April?
No, actually the middle of May. So we have a charter deadline to release the budget by May 16th. So that's our outside date. We are hoping that we will be able to get it out by May 14th, which would time it with the city council agenda. And we could put it as part of the agenda for the May 18th agenda, but release it on May 14th. So somewhere between the 14th and the 16th, we'll have a proposed document.
Okay.
Marnie, I think it was last month, if I recall correctly, that we talked about the potential or the possibility of researching and turned over to the city council a recommendation that they look at bond funding to prepay CalPERS. Do you have any status on that? Has it gone anywhere, or is anything being considered on that?
So the financing team outside of the underwriter have been recommended to the city attorney, and we expect to hear shortly from him whether he's good with those parties. Once we have that, the plan is to go out to an RFP for the underwriting services, and then we can proceed.
Okay, so the reason I ask is because it sounds like that may have a significant impact in the immediate year and in years going forward. And just wanted to get an idea of what the council's attitude is on that project.
Yeah, they would like to hurry with it.
Okay.
So, take as much advantage as we can.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, and we should discuss the last item on the agenda. We should mention this, bring that up again. Okay, Marnie, anything else on the budget?
Yeah, not if you have no more input. I will relay to the city manager that you would like to see the Moss Adams contract funded again.
Okay. Let's move on to item J3.
want to see if was there any public comment on that, Marnie?
There is no Zoom public comment on that.
Okay.
No e-comments. Thank you.
Okay, with J3, this is our single audit report. If you'll recall, back in December, we brought to you and then the City Council all the financial reports resulting from our fiscal year 1920 audit. But we were not able to bring the single audit report because the U.S. Office of Management and Budget, or OMB, was still finalizing their regulations regarding COVID grants. So within the last month, they did finalize their requirements. It did not change the anything in our report as it was in draft. So we were able to finalize that, and we are bringing it to you here. So the single audit is required for all federal and state funded programs. And the auditors do extra work in regards to all of these grant funded programs that we have. And they're following the Single Audit Act of 1984. So they have their report. It has a listing of the programs they audited, with the Section 8 Housing Authority being the major program, which means they did additional test work for that program. That seems to be picked every year just because of the large dollar amount of that program. Then it's followed by any findings, and they had no findings this year. That list of findings and comments is then followed by the previous year's findings, but there were none in the previous year either. So turns out to be quite a good news item. So I can take any questions on it, on our single audit report.
Morning, one question. It's been a while since I've looked at an audit like this, but on the first page, on page 35 of our material, there are a couple of places where the strange things are mentioned. That we considered the city's internal control over financial reporting, but we do not express an opinion on the effectiveness of the city's internal control. And then a couple of other comments like that, where they mention an item they looked at. Clearly, they're examining it in some level of detail, but they go on to say we don't express an opinion. Is that normal wording in a document like this?
Yeah, it sure is. And over my career, I found more of these, what I would call disclaimers of, it's not us, it's all the city's responsibility. Just because, audit firms keep getting sued of you didn't find this or you didn't find that. So, yeah, they step back there.
Woodham, I could.
Remember what they're actually approving or auditing, because it leaves, they're examining an issue, but they don't have an opinion on it. I understand what they're trying to do. They're trying to avoid litigation, but they're also, it seems to be, they're saying we're not really, you shouldn't take a great deal of comfort in some of our comments because we're not really expressing an opinion.
Yeah, they use those, for example, the internal controls. They use that, their evaluation of them more to determine their work plan, whether they need to delve into certain things more deeply, or if they feel the internal controls are in place enough that they don't have to delve quite as deeply, but not expressing an opinion, just using it to formulate their work plan.
Marty, I was going to try to help out there, but you've said it as well as I could. I guess you've read this 100 times and been told this 100 times. And as Eugene has his opportunity to geek out on the insurance, I will take about 1.5 minutes and geek out on the auditor's language.
Go for it.
So, Jerry, I would like for you to be comforted. I will only be able to repeat what Marnie said, is that the public has an opinion that this audit report was issued and therefore the auditors guarantee everything. They do not. So when they're pointing to the internal controls, they said, yes, and I'm just repeating what Marnie said. We looked at them, but only to the extent that it was helpful to audit the financial numbers and not to express a second opinion that nobody could ever overcome these controls for any other purpose. So it's not only normal, and she says it again correctly, it is devised by years of attorneys and experiences that they've had, because what they're expressing is an opinion on the financial statements and not on the specific internal controls. Nothing to be alarmed about.
Okay. Further questions? Any thoughts?
Marnie, just tangentially related. How long, if you know, does our contract with the current auditors go? We've used them this is the 3rd year, is that correct?
This was the 4th, and our upcoming audit of the current fiscal year will be our 5th, and then we'll need to go out to RFP. We're not required to change, but we are required to go out to RFP and look and see if we have the best choice.
And finally, congratulations on 2 years of no findings.
Yeah. Thank you.
Marnie, what do we pay for audit services?
Oh,
$65,000.
that sounds right.
It's remarkably low.
Yeah. Okay.
It may have escalated since we did that RFP 4 years ago, but that's the number that sticks in my head.
I assume we need a motion to receive and file this, Marnie?
Yes, please.
So moved.
Motion to receive and file report for J3.
Second.
Motion's been made and seconded. Let's have a roll call vote. Commissioner Solomon?
Aye.
Commissioner Samples?
Aye.
Commissioner Johnson?
Aye.
Commissioner Wynn?
Aye.
Commissioner Marin?
Aye.
And I vote aye as well.
And for the record, there are no Zoom comments on that item.
No e-comments.
Okay. Okay, last item on the agenda is J4.
And that's all yours as the subcommittee.
If I may, Chair Woodham, when we had our discussion at our last month's meeting about the idea of perhaps not limiting this to just one vendor and looking out to other vendors and cost controls for both the intermediary of Cosmont and Dan Masiello and of the underwriters that we might come for or select. That discussion then carried over to the city council, where there seemed to be some urgency, as Marnie had mentioned, to try and move this forward. And the item actually at city council was for the use of Cosmont services. That hasn't been ultimately determined yet, but I took that and reached out to staff. And what I've been told was, with regard to Cosmont services, and correct me if I misstate anything here, Marnie, there will be a cap on the cost for Cosmont services. So it's not as if they're going to earn a commission if we have an 80% participation or a 90% participation or 100%, their fee will have a hard limit, a hard cap on it. That was something that, according to, I spoke to Assistant City Manager Wazansky, that was introduced and they used when we refinanced the leases in the harbor with the lease revenue bonds. And that seemed to work well. When it came to selecting the underwriters, and Marnie, I think you mentioned this when Commissioner Samples asked a question earlier, there will be some form of RFP or selection process so that it's not simply or complicated where the Cosmont Damasciello or Cosmont companies are saying, we're just going to use this vendor or this vendor to do the underwriting, that there will be some selection process, bidding process, or other associated due diligence so that it is put out to a variety of willing participants for the best opportunity for the city. So some of those concerns that we all had, I think, at the last meeting seem to be being addressed and recognized as a concern going forward as the city council seems to want to take up this project and move it forward. So that's, I related that to Chair Woodham and Chair Conroy in an email as part of our subcommittee correspondence over the last month.
Follow up on the Cosmont issue. They're putting a cap on their revenue, on their fee. City Council approved a contract with them for, I think, $140,000. Does that contract cover all the work they're likely to do on a bond issue, or are there additional services and additional fees that will be paid to Cosmont, or do we know?
145 would be involved with the bond issue.
So they would not go over that fee. So we're capping the fee at that amount.
Yep.
Okay. And Marnie, you said the city attorney was coordinating on this, and I didn't get a full note on that. What is the city attorney helping to select?
They, I can't remember all the parties involved in the financing team, but I know it includes bond counsel. He's going to weigh in on the selection of, legal related firms that would be used.
Okay. And who's handling the RFP for the investment banker? Who on staff do that, or will Cosmont do that?
Cosmont with staff input.
Okay.
I think it'd be worthwhile if anybody on the commission had an opinion or wanted to weigh in. One of the unanswered questions at this point for the council and for them to discuss, and perhaps here for us to discuss, would be what percentage, if not 100% of that obligation, that $211 million, would the city want to issue in the form of either pension obligation or lease revenue bonds? Do we want to hedge against CalPERS overperforming and do 90% or 80%? Or does the city want to look at doing it at 100% of it? And a discussion or recognition of what the relative benefits and burdens are of that and that obligation, because that is something that the council will discuss, and something that I don't know that we really addressed when we had, we did to a certain extent, but not in great detail when we had the Cosmont presentation in front of all of us.
I think that's worth discussing and recommending to City Council if the commission has a firm view on that. In order for CalPERS to surprise us in the future and have returns higher, that means that they'd have to earn more than 7% or more than whatever the new actuarial assumption is. It's unlikely. Well, no one can forecast what returns are going to be. No one can forecast accurately what returns are going to be for the next 20 or 30 years. Having said that, CalPERS over recent history, over 20 years has not returned 7. Over 30 years they have. So it's an even bet as to whether they're going to make the returns or not. I would think that the difference in rates that we're talking about is enough to convince me, at least, to suggest that we go for 100% of the unfunded liability. Having said that, most every pension fund in the country is less than 100% funded. So you could argue that we could be less than 100% and we'd be comfortable. But to whatever extent we continue to be unfunded, we're still going to be paying the difference in interest costs between whatever CalPERS charges us and what we could do with the bond issue, which is going to be less.
Well, one of the other considerations, I suppose, and we're seeing it a little bit in the legislation that was just passed, is part of the legislation on a federal level that got passed is providing funding for a number of pension funds that had become either insolvent or unable to pay their beneficiaries. So recognizing that it is not beyond the realm of possibility that we do this, but some other cities within the state, some other of the stakeholders say, we just can't pay and we're just not going to do it. And so would somebody come in either on a state or a federal level and then bail out, for lack of a better way of putting it, those stakeholders, and we would have taken care of our obligation and been fully funded, and yet we didn't have to do all of that. You know, on a clear day, you can foresee forever, but it would maybe be an argument against doing 100% funding to once again factor in what might be unimaginable. The other component of that being, even with the funding of this pension bond or revenue bond, we still might have an obligation to CalPERS on an annual basis based upon a reset. We might have a year where we have to come up with another $1 million. And so that's not something that we can really plan for. Certainly the idea of the bonding is to try and determine a level of funding where we can count on each year or close to count on. So that might be a reason also not to go at 100% to have some other flexibility. Just a couple of things that occurred to me in trying to figure out whether or not 100, 90, 80, or think about what might be the best way to go.
Yeah, good point.
I agree with Commissioner Solomon's comments there. And, you know, I'll just focus, you said if the unthinkable happens, I don't think it's unthinkable that that there's a failure in the CalPERS system to some extent. It doesn't appear to be sustainable over the longest of terms for any number of reasons, starting with the fact that they can't return 7%. So for us to pre-fund all of our obligation does put us, I think, in a position where we're at risk that there is a different reckoning with CalPERS as a whole, but we've already paid our full share or have provided for that. When in fact, and I like the way you put it, Commissioner Woodham, we can't predict the future, but it is not unthinkable that there will be a different reckoning for CalPERS than obligations will be paid as they are expected to be paid today. I don't think that's sustainable in the long run. So that would, you know, it's like any diversification. Not funding that 100% has a lot of risk mitigation built into it. Thank you.
We seem to have a range here. One of them is that CalPERS could default, and if this becomes a different problem, which means pre-funding any of it doesn't make any sense at all. And the other end of the spectrum is that somehow CalPERS ends up with an investment group that is so outstanding that they significantly outperform their 7% number. And once again, we don't owe anything. Obviously, the solution is probably someplace in the middle. So I would not be in favor of not doing any pre-funding, and I would also not be in favor of 100% pre-funding. The question is, where in that spectrum in the middle do we need to fall? And I don't feel qualified to make that judgment. And I don't think we've seen anything, and I would encourage, whether it's the city council or staff, I'm not even sure what to ask for. What are the range of probabilities, and what is the range of our pre-funding that would make sense? I'm going to kind of guess, along with Commissioner Solomon, that it's probably someplace in the 75 to 90% range, but it's just, I guess it's a seat of the pants kind of guess. So for what it's worth, that's kind of where I'm sitting on this one.
You bring up a point on the government bailout of pension funds. This is something that we have seen coming for some time, and we've seen $6 trillion be raised so far for COVID relief. So before this had happened, I would have guessed that it would have been inconceivable for the federal government to put $1 trillion or $2 trillion into pension funds coast to coast, but it's not inconceivable any longer. It could well happen.
I think the fix in this recent legislation was 86 billion.
I'm sorry?
The fix in the package that just got passed and signed was 86 billion.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess it's a small amount, but it's a toe in the door to get to a much larger amount.
Yeah.
Well, I think maybe the idea, at least, I'm sorry, go ahead, Commissioner Johnson.
Oh, you know, and I know Commissioner Woodham would be the first to say that when we talk about somebody outperforming the market, in the long run, nobody outperforms the market. I think, and we're all speculating here. So what I was going to say is that I don't see the federal government bailing out 90 to 100% pensions for any group of people when the rest of the Americans are getting $25,000 to $40,000 of Social Security. But what I do see is more likely a reckoning where CalPERS ultimately is forced to recognize they can't fund that anymore. And something different needs to happen, and there's no more juice to be squeezed out of the municipalities. That we're not going to take 90% of our budgets and fund pensions with that. So all that does is circle us around to the same place. And likewise, agreeing with Commissioner Samples, I'm not going to throw a dart at the board and say 65% or 85%. But certainly 100% seems to have some inherent risks to it, given any of the things that could happen. The least likely of them happening is the magical outperformance of the market by CalPERS.
Yeah, I agree. I think based on what everyone's saying, I think the recommendation, in my opinion, would be for our commission as some sort of a risk mitigation. We recommend that it not be 100%, but would ask the council to rely upon the experts with whom they're speaking to determine what percentage that should be. But our feeling is that it should not be at 100%. That seems to be the feeling that I'm getting where I would be.
Or to benchmark with what other similar cities have done if they have approached the problem with any wisdom.
Yeah, that's a great point.
To do surveys or have the bond issuer do a survey around what other municipalities are doing in terms of percentage of the shortfall they're trying to cover. So I think that makes sense.
So Marty, could we make that suggestion, or could you, if we all were in agreement on that, suggestion to council and carry that forward to them? It wouldn't have to be a letter or something like that. It'd be simply a recommendation when this comes back to the city council. How would you want to approach that?
That certainly is the easiest, because at some point we'll need to be going back, some point rather soon, need to be going back to city council and updating them. And the easiest is just to include that recommendation in that admin report.
So that would be for something less than 100% and
Yep.
benchmarking. I think Commissioner Marion put it well, benchmarking perhaps against other similarly situated cities.
Yep.
Well, I'd be for that if everyone else would be for that.
I think it's a good idea. Does anyone object to that?
No
Good.
objection.
Marnie, can you do that then?
Sure will.
Anything else to discuss on the CalPERS issue? Okay. Looks like we are item K.
Commissioner Woodham?
Referrals to staff.
Commissioner Woodham, on the other part of this is the workers' comp side. I noticed that in our calendar for the May meeting, I believe it is, we're supposed to have a presentation regarding workers' comp actuarial report, something that we had discussed a few months ago. Marnie, who is putting together the questions or the issues that we would like to have the actuaries review for us? And let's try to be really precise so that we don't take up a lot of their time or our time.
Well, what the actuary is going to do is he's going to do his 2 annual citywide reports for workers' comp and our general liability claims. And then he's going to do a 3rd report using that same data and replicate the workers' comp report, but use only claims related to the fire department.
Okay. I think what our question, and please someone correct me if I get this wrong, I think our question was, what happens to our workers' comp exposure, the city's workers' comp exposure, if we remove the fire department from the city? Because we have a 10-year forecast right now that says workers' comp goes up every year for 10 years. And our question was, if we take the fire department out, what happens? And that was really our question.
And when the actuary was here, though, all he agreed that he could do was his same report, just with fire department claims only.
I think that solves the problem, though, Commissioner Samples. We wanted to see what the numbers that were reflected that we had seen for the fire department, and have the actuary look at that and do an analysis of what it actually would be when you took out the new claims and when the old claims aged out. I think that's specifically what we asked him to do.
Well, that the report does separate out existing claims and possible future claims.
Okay. Maybe I'm not understanding this correctly, so please help me, because I thought what we were trying to figure out was what should we expect the workers' comp component, or the fire department's workers' comp component of our budget, if the fire department were not part of the city? So if we picked a date, say July 1st, 2021, if they moved to some other agency or they were no longer part of our payroll, what would that do to our workers' comp exposure over the next 10 years? I think that's what we were asking for. Maybe I'm not hearing, maybe that's exactly what you're saying, but I'm not hearing it right.
And to answer just that question is not what he's contracted to do. He's contracted just to replicate that report that he presented to you, but with fire department data only. If you then extrapolate from that report, what might happen, but to throw an extra, analysis into that, it is not what he's contracted to do.
If he gives us the fire department data, based on what you said, Commissioner Samples, where we have an end date and then looking forward to what those expenditures will look like, that's what it sounds like to me that he's going to do.
Okay, well.
And you could go ahead and you could extrapolate that into what it does for the overall budget by siloing that one particular department. He's going to silo that department.
Okay.
That's what it sounded like to me.
Yes.
That I think accomplishes what you're trying to,
Okay.
what you're looking for.
Okay. I will try it. I somehow my head isn't wrapped around it, but I will try it. If everyone else is comfortable, I will try it.
Okay. I
If I
think,
could say one more thing,
Sure.
I wanted to thank the commissioners and the staff for the subcommittee for the CalPERS and the work comp. I think, and I want to thank Marnie for putting the subcommittee discussion of CalPERS on the agenda every month, because I think it's been really helpful for all of us that we were prepared by pre-planning. We were prepared to jump in and have that Cosmos presentation. We have been discussing it. Commissioner Woodham had been doing some research, and I think that we were in a position to help make cogent recommendations to the council, and then have the discussion here and be ready for it, so we weren't overwhelmed with all the information at once. So I want to thank everybody for all the input on that, and it's something that went to council, and we don't often get to see things that we're talking about here maybe come to fruition, and especially big things like this. And I think that everybody here had a hand in if this happens, had a hand in making that happen. And that's what, to me, these commissions are all about. So I want to thank everybody for all the input on that at every meeting.
good point. Okay, referrals to staff. Let's go through the Commissioner Solomon,
I have nothing. Thank you.
Commissioner Samples,
I have nothing. Thank you.
Commissioner Johnson,
Nothing, thank you.
Commissioner Wynn,
Nothing here. Thank you.
Commissioner Marin,
Nothing at this time. Thanks.
and I also have nothing. So unless there's anything else on anyone's mind, I think we're ready to adjourn. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn. Second.
I think we have to do a roll call on this. Commissioner Solomon,
Yes.
Commissioner Samples,
Yes.
Commissioner Johnson,
Yes.
Commissioner Wynn,
Aye.
Commissioner Marin,
Yes.
I vote yes as well. We are adjourned. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you,
everyone.
everybody.
Good night.
Stay safe.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.